Hi, this is Warren and Neil from Organic Growth, and we're excited to be with you today.
Yes, hi, I'm Neil.
And today we're going to be covering in this series, I don't know how long the series is going to be, but we're going to be covering structuring, property investment structuring. And today we're going to be covering the 5 pitfalls of structuring. So Neil, can you run us through them and let us know what are the main pitfalls?
Sure. Well, the first pitfall to avoid is the death penalty.
You might wonder why we're laughing, but just now I just said, hasn't it passed away?
Okay, well, I mean, I said it for shock value, but what happens is when you, in this country anyway, you're penalised when you die.
Okay.
Your estate is penalised, and what happens is the state comes in and they try and muscle in on your capital growth. You've worked your whole life, you built up a property portfolio, and when you die, the taxman comes and says, "I want a slice of the pie," and it's a significant slice. So you need to the pitfall that I see is that people don't structure their portfolio properly, and so what happens is they expose themselves to serious property tax, estate duty tax.
Yes, okay.
So what you really need is you need to have the proper trust structure in place.
Okay.
So that your properties are not actually owned by yourself, but they're owned by another entity, which in this case is a trust. We'll more about that later. The other thing that I see happening is if you own your whole property portfolio in your own name, what happens is when you die, all your bank accounts freeze.
Sure. Okay.
And it leaves your wife and your children with a serious cash flow problem.
Sure. Okay.
Because if all the money's going through your account, that account freezes, and suddenly all the rentals coming in, but they can't go out.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah.
You know, so they have to accessing cash is a real problem, and they're suffering the trauma and so on, and they've got to add to that cash problems. So if you structure it properly, nothing happens. You know, all that happens when you die. Sure, your family lose you, and one hope that they'll be sort of crestfallen by that. But I don't want to make light of it. But what they're not going to lose is they're not going to lose sleep about how they're going to keep putting food on the table while your estate's being wound up. All that happens is the trust loses a trustee. Okay. So they appoint a new trust and carries business as usual. And if your property's in a company, the company loses a director. Business carries on as usual. You just replace the director and away you go. And
well, earlier on you were telling me about what happens to estates. I mean, some of them have to actually sell.
Yes, if you're you must have heard of a deceased estate sale. And if you do property, you want to go to those, because that's where you pick up some fairly good deals sometimes. And what happens there is that the executor of the estate actually has to sell some of your property portfolio to be able to pay the tax.
The death penalty.
Yeah, that's the death penalty. Okay.
Yeah, paying tax when you die. So it's not, I mean, while you're living, there's taxes, and when you die, they one final taxable.
Yes, final taxable. Okay, so that's enough about the death penalty, I think. Unless you want to say more.
And how much is it? Like, I mean, well, the percentages change, but I mean, it can cost you millions.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. It's like 20%. But I don't want to, you know, the amount is not significant because we want to avoid it.
Yeah, okay. So there is a way to avoid it.
I don't know the exact amount, to be honest.
Okay.
It's a
like a sliding scale.
It's a sliding scale, and there's so I don't want to get into the exact penalties. I just want to avoid it.
Yeah. Okay.
The second pitfall is getting ahead of your tax structure, getting ahead of your property structure.
Okay.
Now, what I mean by that is I've seen property guys, or people when they're getting into property, they get excited about it. You know, when you start saying, "Wow, this is such an excellent property creation, wealth creation tool," I want to get into it. And now suddenly your focus changes, and you're like, they want to buy property. And they've got some money together, and away they go, they buy it. And I say to them, "Well, how are you buying it?" And they look at me strangely. Well, I'm buying it. So I say, "Is it going into your name or in the name of your company or a trust?" And they haven't thought about it. And they're like the proverbial cowboy who pulls the trigger before he pulls the gun out of his holster.
Okay.
Okay, so you've got to actually take the gun out of the holster before you pull the trigger.
So what happens if you don't structure properly?
Well, if you don't structure properly, what happens is you end up with properties in the wrong owning entity. Now, I fell into this pitfall when I started investing in property.
Yeah.
What happened was I had nobody around to show me the ropes. I knew a bit about property. I'd been a broker I've been in property for about 15 years, but I hadn't been an investor for that time. And so if I spoke to my accountant, he told me one thing. If I spoke to a lawyer, he told me another. If I spoke to the estate agent, he told me a completely different story. He just said sign. Don't worry about it, just sign.
Yeah, okay, sign.
So what I did is I did a bit of everything. So I put some properties in my own name, some in a company, some in a trust, some in a CC, some in my wife's name. I didn't ever get around to putting them in my children's name, but I was heading there.
Okay.
And in the process, I kind of worked it all out, and then of course I had to clean up the mess. And what happens is when you've got a property that's in your own name, but you want to move it into your trust, that the government and the law see you as two separate entities. So you actually have to transfer. You've got to sell it to the trust. So there's another transfer duty, another. You've got to transfer the bonds, everything. So it's a very expensive process. So that's what happens when you go and buy property.
So you have to pay what, like transfer fees and everything?
Yeah, transfer duty. It's two individuals.
It's like buying the house again.
Yeah, you're selling it to yourself. You're selling it to your trust. So you want to avoid that. So so you got to get your structure in place before you start buying your properties. Okay. The third pitfall I want to address is getting the wrong attorneys to set up your trusts. It's been very fashionable in South Africa. Get a trust. And Warren's just had a meeting with our trust guy. We've got a trust guy the other day, and tell us what he said about trust in this country.
Well, yeah, he's a trust specialist and he's an advocate, but he was just telling me 91% of all trusts are basically kind of useless, because if you put them to the legal test, in other words, they go to court, they basically they're not classified as a real trust, and it's basically just a front, so there's no protection.
Yeah, there's no
protection whatsoever.
Because bearing in mind, the reason for a trust is to actually protect your wealth. You've got to ring fence your wealth.
That's it, yeah.
Okay, for your current needs and for your future generational needs.
Okay.
It doesn't help anybody if you sit there complacently thinking that it's all in a trust, but the government comes over and says that's clearly a family trust, and you're just trying to hide your wealth.
So what are you trying to protect your wealth from? From the death penalty or the death taxes?
From the death taxes and from any litigation. You might have personal litigations against one of the trustees, one of the family members, and so on. You have an ex-wife coming in and trying to sue one of your family members.
So you're protecting your
ex-husband, and then your assets are exposed. Your family, you might have a family syndicate. You see, and now suddenly you're exposing a family wealth to an ex-spouse or any of that sort of situation.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I don't want to go into the actual details, but your wealth can suffer attack, and it often does.
Okay.
So the idea of having the correct structure is it protects that completely. So you manage it, you finance it, you have access to all the money, but it's not yours. You're entrusted with the wealth, but it's not yours. That's actually what happens.
So this is like really essential that people set up a proper structure. This is the main point today, is that you need a proper structure, and these are the pitfalls to avoid.
And there are people out there who just sell trusts. Yeah. And they can sell you a shelf trust, and you think, oh great, I've got my trust.
Well, you get like cheap ones, like 1,000 Rand, 2,000 Rand, you got your trust.
Yes, but actually it doesn't. It's
useless.
When it's tested, it falls short.
It fails, okay.
Okay, so you've got to make sure. The pitfall that I find people is in fact most people, as we find out in this country, 91% of people fall into this trap.
Okay.
Okay, so the fourth pitfall is having the wrong accountant. Now we've spoken about the wrong attorney who's setting up your trust, but the same thing can be true of your accountant.
Yeah.
You need an accountant who actually understands property and property law and property tax and trusts.
Yes.
And he's got to transact properly between your property owning company and your trust.
Yeah.
Because the kind of structure that works, the simplified structure, is you have a trust that owns the shares in a company.
It's a share trust, yeah.
It's a share trust, okay. It owns the shares in your company, and your company owns the properties.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you and your spouse or whoever are the directors of the company and the trustees of the trust.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got these entities. You have yourselves, you have the company, and you have the trust. And there's financial interaction between the trust and the company.
Yeah.
And there's financial interaction between yourselves and the company, and yourselves and the trust. And that's all got to be done correctly. Otherwise, it proves that your trust isn't a trust.
Okay.
Or I don't know. That's
not
the wrong kind of language.
Independent trust.
You could, if he doesn't do it properly, it can prove that once it gets to court, they can prove that it's actually just your family wealth that you've tied up there, and not an independent trust, which is what the objective of this.
And one of the things on the trust, you need to have an independent trustee, but that structuring, we're not going into detail today, but
just has to be
the
done
actual
properly.
Structuring, you must do it properly. and that's why you need to really choose the right legal advice here, and somebody that's got experience, and let's call it a trust specialist.
A trust specialist who understands property.
Yeah, yeah.
Like our guy. We got a guy.
Yeah, we got a guy who understands both property and the actual legal side as well.
And in the fifth point, the last one I want to bring up is having the wrong coach. Now, in my case, I was my own coach. I was the player coach.
Okay.
And we talk about this a lot. The best golfer in the world walks around with his coach all the time. Every tournament he plays, he's got his coach with him. Now, Tiger Woods, for example, is much better golfer than his coach.
Yeah.
But his coach is always there. And your coach is somebody who looks at the bigger picture, keeps an eye on your swing, make sure you don't get distracted and so forth. But when you're setting up the structure, it's essential that you have somebody who actually understands property investment.
Yes.
Understands the structures that are required and actually can focus you.
Yeah.
And help you structure it, because otherwise you're just going to end up in a minefield.
The important thing here is you need, when you're selecting a coach, you need an experienced property investor who's been through the mill and understands the structures. Otherwise, he's got the bigger picture. He's been in property. He needs to understand the accounting side. He needs to understand the legal side, the trust side, and the property investment side. So you've got three sides you've got to look at this thing from. So if you just do it yourself and you don't have the proper advisors and the skills set that you need, you end up falling into lots of traps.
Yeah. And your property coach is really only required in the beginning.
Yeah.
While he's showing you the ropes and getting a structure in place. Because once it's in place, it's sounding a bit too complicated, but once it's in place, it's very simple.
And another thing that's important for your structuring is reason that you have proper structuring is your financing.
Oh, yes.
Because that will be covered in a later series, and when we're talking about how to get financing, because you've got different structures, and the banks and the financiers look at structures very carefully, what your structures are. You need to structure it in order to be able to get more and more finance. So that's a key, but that's not what we're covering today. But
that's what your coach will help you with.
Yeah, that's very, very important. So do you want to just summarize then for us?
Sure. So the five pitfalls to avoid. Firstly is let's avoid the death penalty. And let's get our structure correct.
Yeah.
And not buy properties until you've got your structure in place.
Yeah.
And then use the correct attorney and the correct accountant. Do your homework to make sure you get the right people there, and make sure you've got an experienced property investor who can act as your coach, who can work with you through this process. With those 5 things in place, you're a long way towards your goal.
Okay, and thanks for watching. And just so that you know that we're going to have a continuation of this, we're going to go into more detail. So please just email us your questions. You can go onto our blog, put your questions there. Email them to Neil and myself, and then we'll look at addressing your questions, because now we need to look at exactly how you need a structure, how you're going to structure it, and we can look at more details and answering some of your questions there as well. Okay, thanks so much.
That's it for today. Cheers.
Okay, cheers.